Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 70 of Celebrating the Brand Ambassador. I cannot believe it has been almost 3 years and I'm done 70 episodes. I'm really excited to be here today with my two guests. So I have Amanda Elder, who is the Spirits Content and Education, make sure I get the manager for Skurnik Wines Spirits. And I have Stephen Dragun, who is the national brand ambassador for Lustau Sherry. I'm sure there's a longer thing. Is it Sherry Wine and Spirits or Lustau?
No, just Sherry is fine.
Sherry is fantastic. Well, welcome you two. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having me. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to start off with a question I always ask everybody, and feel free to expand because these are very unique jobs. And I think it's really interesting for most people when they're on the bar side of things or just getting into industry, like just to know about what different careers are available to them. Because everybody's always like, what am I going to do next? So I'm going to start with you. So Amanda, can you share some of your responsibilities? What are your main duties? What does a spirits and education manager do? So
I ask myself that question every day. My job's evolved a lot since I've been with Skurnik, and I wear a lot of hats. But as far as primary responsibilities are concerned, I am responsible for collecting information about our brands and our producers, then vetting that information, filling in gaps, especially when it comes to the production side of things, anticipating the types of questions that our sales team and the accounts might ask about any of our items, and then a lot of copywriting for internal announcements, the Skurnik website, secondary collateral for seminars or sales materials. And then I also take point on helping wireframe and execute some of our internal education. Mainly that involves our monthly sales meetings for both the East Coast and the West Coast in California. And any of the large scale events that we do that are account facing, like large seminars and tastings. I have a strong hand in figuring out how to put together the information and execute those types of educations as well.
fantastic. I was going to say, there must be a lot of PowerPoints in your life.
There's so much word, honestly. There's so much, like, more than I ever would have expected, and so much Excel. But yeah, and then a decent chunk of PowerPoint as well, for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's amazing. But also, I mean, okay, so are they taking on new products all the time, or are you constantly editing? Okay.
Constantly. I mean, and it's a combination of both. We have a list of incoming items, brands that we already carry that are extending what they offer. All of these businesses are growing and they're constantly creating new things. So we have a lot of line extensions that we're thinking about, and then new brands constantly. It tends to be sort of a snowball of momentum as the company continues to get bigger. More people want to come and pitch their spirits, and if it's a good spirit and we see the opportunity to sell it, then chances are probably pretty good we're going to take it on, at least in one of our markets. So we're constantly writing new information and then going back and updating the copy that we're writing and the educations that we're writing, both categorically and for our legacy brands, because none of that is stagnant. It always needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I can imagine it does. I mean, it is always constantly evolving, isn't there? Because line extent and it's also. Do you get to interview the producers?
Yeah, because I think this is because it's a combination of both my mildly antisocial tendencies and also my training in graphic design to want information in writing. Whenever you're creating a design brief, it's really important to have the person that you're communicating with, the client, whoever they are, actually write down what it is that they want. There's real power in using words and articulating something on paper, or in this case, usually an email, versus just saying it out loud, because it makes them stop and really think about intention and look at the fine details. It also gives us the opportunity to go back and compare information, especially over time, and to be able to share that information with other people on the team. So phone calls for sure happen. And I love having educations in person with these brands as our relationships evolve with them. But initially, I love having the information just laid out in writing so I can really start to see where holes are in the technical information, things that they wouldn't even have considered, perhaps, that people would want to know, and where we can see if our language is being consistent with how we're talking about other brands. And it's really, for me, that's very much a visual process.
Yeah, no, I'm a visual person too. I need to have that, but I also need to have that like one-on-one with somebody to kind of hear how they explain it. I was gonna say in the last question on this is on the the writing copy. do they send you real information or the marketing BS? Because like Diageo, when I worked for Diageo for many years, and I'd look at this and then I would go to the distillery and I'd be like, oh, this is all just BS, right? You just put this together, it sounds good. And then I would find out the real deal. And then I'd have to talk to legal, what I was actually allowed to say versus what was actually happening versus what we actually communicated. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it depends on the producer, and no shame in sort of like the shinier sales fixing materials. Yeah. I think those definitely have their place. And then because of the markets that we're working in, primarily East Coast and in California, LA and San Francisco, you're working with a caliber of account that is likely to ask some very discerning questions, which is really exciting because that level of education keeps on growing. So it's really important to have the technical side of things too. But sometimes, depending on where these items are coming from, it hasn't even occurred to these makers that people are going to ask those questions. Yeah. So they don't necessarily have them ready to go right away. And you're really just like doing this process of sort of unpacking what they give you and then starting to put it together in the way that you think will be the most helpful.
No, that makes sense. And I know we're going to talk about later on about how to like really create educational content that resonates. So, Stephen, I'd love to hear what is your role entail as the national brand ambassador for Lustau?
Well, it's very education focused. I mean, I do a lot of the normal duties of a brand ambassador, staff trainings, trying to get menu placements, new account placements. But really, my main focus these days is I'm one of the 2 people that offer the certification course that Lustau started, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago. It's the only certification course offered outside of the master exam in Jerez. Pre-COVID, our brand educator was the only person really working on this. COVID happened. We kind of had to pivot to moving the course online, which essentially kind of opened the door as far as how many people we could, get certified. And it kind of grew to the point where our brand educator, Lucas, could only focus solely on the online courses. So I've taken on the duties of offering this course for our distributors and for the trade. So most of the time I'm traveling around and, working on distributor relationships or, offering this course or some sort of elevated either, sherry training, or I've been doing a lot of category training as well, like a fortified wine, like umbrella category training. So, everything I do is mostly education based, simply because, everything we do has to translate to sales at the end of the day. And I feel like with sherry in particular, the sales come with the education just because the category itself is so complex. There's so much to talk about. There's so many different styles. There's so many different applications. So I feel like the sales come with the education, just showing up, spending a bit of time, with the account or, with the distributor usually yields good results.
That's amazing. No, I totally agree with that. And that's why brand ambassadors exist. And that's why education exists. I think one of the biggest challenges we all face is showing the ROI on that. So I was going to say, do you ever run reports like before you're in an account versus after you've been in an account, just to see if that education actually had it resonated with them and had any impact?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I usually get depletions once a month, nice. So I'll usually, check then. And I'm, pleasantly surprised, especially when it's a larger educational event, the impact it has. I guess it was February of this year, was one of the better events I've done in a while. It was a very extensive training for our distributor in Minnesota. We showcased the finer wines of Lustau, our Almacenista series, smaller production, higher end wines. And then we had it was the best pairing event I've done. It was a sherry and dumpling pairing event.
I find that so fascinating. I want to go out and get some dumplings right now.
It was great. I mean, the months building up to it, I just kept getting more and more excited because, of course, I love dumplings. But what I thought was the most impactful was, how most of these pairing events are, it's a sit-down dinner and it's this big, expansive, 2-hour ordeal. This was very, come and go. We were offering the dumplings for, I don't know, maybe about an hour after the training. And, we had key buyers coming in and out. And then, a month later, when I, came back to Chicago and was checking the depletions, I was really surprised at, how many depletions I got while I was there. So I think, offering these, educational courses, and trying to do it in a really interesting or unique way really does yield great results.
No, I love that. I think that's really fun because I'm assuming people, so you're saying they weren't sitting down, they kind of walked in, grab a dumpling, and then they come over to a table and then they kind of got a little bit of a...
Right. Yeah. So I had a station of all the wines. The dumplings were laid out, one per plate. Pick up a dumpling, come over. I'll talk about the pairing, why we decided to choose it, and yeah, come back as many times as you want. Revisit whatever you want. The laid back atmosphere really, I thought benefited the overall experience.
I can imagine it is because, God, we've all sat down through those dinners, right? Or just sat down like any dinner, like you sit down through a wine dinner, you've sat down through a spirit dinner. And it's great if you have great company around you and there's an amazing presenter, and sometimes time can fly. And then there's other times you've sat and you're like, oh my God.
I just want to go home.
I just want to go home. I don't care anymore. I don't care. I don't care 8,000 years old. I just don't want to be here. And as a presenter, I'm sure you've seen the people in the audience, and no matter how engaging you might be, you just see some of the buyers who don't give a shit. They're just like, I'm here because my boss made me come here. And
yeah. You get these glazed looks. It is interesting, doing these, from a national standpoint, like doing this in New York versus doing it in Minnesota. The overall, enthusiasm in New York would be much lower, just because there's, so many of these types of offerings, throughout the year. So I feel like anytime you go to a secondary market and you offer something special, the feedback is usually, over the top. Thank you so much for coming. This was wonderful. In a bigger market, it's harder to make a positive impact, just because every brand is trying to do something unique. And at this point, I feel like, is there anything else new that, we could do? I feel like we're all just doing the same things and we keep tweaking it. But, to offer this really unique experience that no one is doing is really hard these days.
It's really hard. I mean, Amanda, I don't know, you have any thoughts on that, being here in New York?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a massive amount of saturation, especially since the pandemic, when people really transitioned to doing more virtual education. Like, you could have logged on to education every 5 minutes, of every day over the course of a week. And I definitely took pause for a moment thinking about what was really valuable at the time, especially as we started coming out of lockdown, because really a lot of programs were just focused on making sure that they had staff and that they could keep the doors open and that everyone was taken care of. And that sort of elevated education didn't really seem to be the most important thing. And sort of taking a step back and questioning, okay, now that we're at this point in the industry, what is it that people want to learn? What's going to interest them? Like, what's relevant? Is a really important question. And I think just even allowing experiences where you're tasting the spirits and not just in sort of a clinical setting is massively important to getting people engaged and sort of reinvigorating their imaginations with how to use all of these spirits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love
I had a table of wine and all the dumplings were laid out is like my favorite sentence.
Yeah, who doesn't love it? I like dumpling. It's like, yeah, that does sounds like fun. And I was gonna say, it is better. Everything's better in the secondary market in many ways, because they are more excited to see you. They're like, oh, somebody's paying attention to us. Thank you so much for showing up. Where in New York, it's like, oh, geez, yeah, fine. Like another one. Like, is it going to be as good as the one I just went to, which was on the rooftop and there was caviar and like really expensive champagne? We're in Chicago. We're very spoiled. We are very, very spoiled in many ways. All right. So I would love to hear some, Amanda. Not everybody knows. I know Skurnik's in quite a few markets, but not everywhere. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Skurnik and like a little bit about the history and how it's evolved.
Sure. So Skurnik is an importer and distributor of wine and spirits. It was started in the late 80s by Michael Skurnik. His brother and his partner, Harmon, became part of the company very shortly thereafter. And they really started with just a focus on really beautifully made wine from small producers that they didn't want to be exorbitantly expensive. And that was really based on like getting to know the people that were making these products. And they built over the years just this really passionate team of people that was extremely excited and educated about the wine that they were selling. And then it wasn't until about 11 years ago that they decided to really start expanding the spirit side of things. They hired Adam Schumann, who's my boss and the director of the spirits portfolio, to start evolving what happened. And I think the momentum just really never stopped. I remember meeting him when he first took the job, and I just don't think he slept ever since, to be honest. So when I first started about 6 years ago, on the East Coast, we had I think I was maybe the fourth or fifth person on the team, and now on the spirits team specifically. And now on the East Coast, we have about 16 people on the spirits team. And of course, that's only one of the portfolios within the company. There are many beautiful wine portfolios as well. But we also have a company in California that I think actually just celebrated their 7-year anniversary and has been growing quite steadily in both wine and spirits. We also have a company that's growing in the Midwest now, focused on Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, but it keeps on growing, and a small but mighty national team that focuses a lot on the items that we're directly importing, but is starting to grow in items that we distribute as well. So the scale has just been kind of really exciting, especially in the last couple of years, but I've never quite been involved in anything like this, having come from really small, independently owned bars and restaurants. So it's interesting to see how the infrastructure grows, and we keep on figuring out how to really scale in a way that works, thinking about future growth, but still hanging on to all of that fine detail and the passion for the producers that I think Skurnik was really built on.
Yeah, because a lot of people do talk about Skurnik in that way, like, that the salespeople are really well educated on the products that they're, selling, and they can be like partners to you in your account, like helping you do your wine lists and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not just hype. Like everyone, honestly, I feel incredibly lucky to be working with the people that I work with here. Everyone is so smart. I know nothing about wine, but honestly, I haven't really had to learn anything because all the people around me are so well educated. They're always going to put a beautiful glass of something in front of me, so I can just kind of focus more on raising my bar of spirits education. But everyone here, really loves this industry and really loves the people that we represent. And I think it's really notable that over the years as we've grown, I haven't seen the quality of the items that we're selling diminish in any sort of way, even as the portfolio has gotten larger, which is very much a testament to what Michael and Harmon built in the first place, and within spirits, what Adam is really spearheading for the portfolio.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it is impressive. I know a couple of your sales reps, and their knowledge about spirits is pretty intense. Is almost at the same level as their level of wine, and I'm sure that has something to do with you as well, and all the education material, and Adam, as you mentioned. But it is like their passion is almost equal, because sometimes I hear about brands going to a wine house or whatever, and they always ask me, sometimes I get asked my opinion, what do you think about that? I'm like, well, see how good their spirit knowledge, are they passionate about it? Do they care? Because I was like, they might be wanting to do this, but it doesn't mean they're going to sell your product and it might get lost amongst the wine. But I never see that with Skurnik.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The sales team here is responsible for selling both wine and spirits. And then the spirits portfolio has a team of what we call spirit specialists. They are only focused on spirits. They're salaried positions, and they're really meant to just help the reps, go to accounts and talk confidently about spirits. So they're really there in a supportive capacity. It's an interesting system, but it really allows the sales team to be able to develop the knowledge that they already have, most of them coming from a wine background, although honestly, I've seen that shift a little bit in the last couple of years. More of the newer employees are coming from spirits backgrounds as well, which I think is, part of the fact that we're representing spirits really so beautifully in the company. But it's a massive amount of stuff to be able to know about and speak about intelligently. So I think there's a really good culture here of being proud of what you know and not being afraid to ask questions, and making sure that there's a support system around you to help shore up anything that you don't know about, in the service of the account.
Yeah, and it says a lot that they have somebody like you on board who comes from the bar side of things, helping to curate all the knowledge to make sure it's relevant for what they're going to be saying out there in the world. So well done on them and you. We're taking on that job. I was going to say, Steve, could you tell us more about Lustau? I mean, it obviously is a very historic, very old sherry company. I've had the pleasure of going to visit them and see and learn about their history in person, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about it.
Sure, absolutely. Before I get into that, though, just to kind of I guess, give Skurnik a big promo. Best distributor I've ever worked with. I still, to this day, it's been 2 years since New York, still the best distributor I've ever worked with. Everyone on the team there is fantastic. It truly is. It's a sight to be seen. Like, if you do things the right way, how impactful they can be, over time. And I think it's just a testament to, Harmon and Michael. They've really built a wonderful distributorship and employed so many great people. So we always have enjoyed working with y'all. And to be honest, I feel, especially in New York, Lustau has grown, over the last 10 years or so, by leaps and bounds, due to Skurnik. So I feel like, we're kind of hand in hand as companies, because a lot of our, success stories in New York, and then, as that trickles, across the nation, it really is a testament to Skurnik. So thank y'all. Lustau.
For those of you watching, this was not planned. I had no
not planned
idea
at all. No.
That Lustau was actually in Skurnik. It just happened to be a luck of the draw. And I will say, it's the first time I've ever heard a brand compliment a distributor and an importer ever. So well done on you. So yeah, you heard it here first, everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
It does exist.
It does exist. It's hard to find, but it does exist. Lustau, we started in 1896. One of the older houses, not quite the oldest, but amongst the bigger names, that were founded in the 19th century, like Gonzalez Baez and Williams and Humboldt and Valdespino. We were a bit later, but we were amongst the first. So 1896, Mr. Jose Ruiz Verdejo, he was a clerk for the local court. He had his own winery on his family estate, and he started producing sherry. His daughter Maria took over in the 1930s, and she bought a vineyard, closer to the town center, and really started to expand the family business. And then her husband in the 1940s, Mr. Emilio Lustau, really started to push the brand forward. By the mid 1940s, we started to transition from being an almacenista to an exporter. In the sherry world, there are really two types of wineries. There are almacenistas. These are small producers that are really only legally able to sell within the sherry region. So they either sell locally, or they'll sell their wines to a larger company, and that company will, put their name and bottle it and sell it as their own product. So in the 1940s, we transitioned from an almacenista to an exporter, which are legally able to ship and sell outside of the sherry region. And then, in the 1980s is when the brand really started to pick up, visually. We changed the bottle design to the bottle that we are still using today. And that's when the brand really started to grow. And then this happened long before I came on, and it's still something we're very grateful for. Lustau has become kind of the, one of the default go-to sherries for cocktail creation. I feel like it's in two part in that we have a wonderful complete lineup. I think we're the only winery that has Fino or Manzanilla from each of the three towns of the Sherry Triangle, but a really expansive portfolio, over 40 wines, really allowing us to, tailor, what would work best for an individual account or for a cocktail. I feel like we have a wide array of options. So I feel like that's kind of how we became one of the default go-to houses for sherry. That being said, I feel like one of the biggest misconceptions is, Lustau's everywhere. We're huge, on the same scale as the Gonzalez Baez. In actuality, we're probably fifth back as far as production goes. We're I would say small, medium, small bodega. So that's something that we're still trying to drive home, is that even though we have a good amount of visibility out in the market, we are still, a small winery. We don't produce a lot each year. COVID was, hard for, out of stock issues, which of course, was the case for everyone. But we're still having, some issues that we, are ironing out because of that. So it's a challenge at times to be, a brand that everyone wants to use. But, during times where, shipping or, whatever it is, a bad harvest, we can't produce as much in a particular year, it does create problems for, supply and demand on our end. So it's something that we're, continuously trying to work on, to make sure that we're available, everywhere we can be. But, we're grateful for the growth we've had, over the 100 years, and in particular within the last 20 to 30 years, as, the cocktail has, reinvigorated, the drinking culture. We're happy that Lustau has kind of been able to piggyback along the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it must be weird as somebody who's been a couple to Jerez a few times and I've never had this conversation with anybody about them thinking about their sherry, because everybody drinks it, in a glass, a nice wine glass. You drink it with dinner, you drink it after dinner, you drink it before dinner. It can be, used in many different ways with the different styles. Is it strange for them to think that people are using it in cocktails?
Yeah, and I mean, when I first started with Lustau, I'm approaching October will be 8 years. But the first couple years, Jerez was really, adamant about, well, why aren't people drinking, more sherry by the glass? And if you go to Spain, if you're not in the Jerez region, you go to Madrid or, Barcelona, you realize, well, people aren't really drinking sherry over there either. They're drinking, red wine, gin and tonics, loads of vermouth, to the point where, we have created a whole vermouth lineup. But even over in Spain, if you're not a sherry lover or an aficionado, you probably aren't drinking sherry by the glass. So that was something, we really had to reiterate. The drinking culture over here is much different. Fortified wine in general is still something that, most people are not knowledgeable on. How people treat their vermouth is a great example.
Put it in the fridge.
Put it in the fridge. That's all you have to
fridge.
Yeah. So yeah, we're happy that, especially within the trade, lots of bartenders do love sherry and will drink it by the glass, or, sherry shots at events. So we're grateful for that. But as far as, the everyday consumer, wanting a glass of sherry, in particular the drier styles, we still have a long way to go.
Oh, it's shameful because it's so
good. It is shameful. Yeah, it's so delicious. Yeah.
So delicious. And I think we talked about this before, like, I definitely know I was introduced to sherry, and I think a lot of the cocktail industry back in 2005, 2006 by Steve Olson. Steve Olson was, the unofficial brand ambassador, or the official one of all things. The original brand ambassador, and introduced so many of us, would hold sherry classes and things of that nature. And then the sherry competition was done for a few years. I know a lot of people entered that, and it really got people using sherry in cocktails. But I am a fan. I'm glad there's people out there like yourself. We need more sherry people out there and more sherry producers. Lustau is lovely and amazing. And it's like, I think the bigger the category becomes, and the more people will start adopting it. But one step at a time.
Absolutely. No. And because it's, such a unique category, when you go to Jerez, you really do feel the sense that they're all in this together, I mean, we're all competing, and we all need to, sell our products. But at the end of the day, sherry as a whole is trying to thrive. And so we really are supportive of one another. All the bodegas typically, work with wine cooperatives within the region, trying to spread the resources evenly amongst all the bodegas. They just passed some new revisions to the sherry production laws back in December, which is going to allow producers outside of the sherry triangle, to produce wines in, say, like Lebrija or Chiclana, these smaller towns outside of, the main triangle area. They'll be able to, produce their wines there and actually start to age them there.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to start to see some, finer wines coming from these smaller towns. And I think it's just going to help bolster the category as a whole. So it's a very exciting time to be in sherry. These changes, they're put in place now, but obviously you won't see them, for 5 to 10 years. But I'm really excited for, what's going to be pumping out. They've also authorized some new grapes that can be used in sherry production. So we went from 3 to 6. So yeah, it's an exciting time. We're going to start to see some really cool stuff coming out of the Jerez region in the next 5 years or so.
Yay. Well, like everything and coming from us, it will take 5 to 10 years for anything to
definitely
evolve. They don't do anything very quickly, but I love, obviously there's a reason for that. But and especially in production. All right, so I want to talk to you guys. You both have really creative backgrounds. I mean, Stephen, you produce, written. You have a background in music, right? You went to school for music. You've taught music, produced music as well.
Yeah, I started writing and producing a few years ago. COVID really, helped that.
Yeah, amazing. And Amanda, you studied art history and graphic design, and you use that, in your, I overthink of people like entering the bar industry, and like I was a creative director at Pouring Ribbons. I'm like, I didn't know bars had these kind of jobs. So I would love to hear, because a lot of people obviously, they to go to school, they have their background, and it's like, oh, and then a lot of people end up in a great way at working in the restaurant bar industry because they love it. So how do you still, like, how has that background kind of influence you? Like, Amanda, I'll start with you, because it definitely did become a big part of your career.
Absolutely. And it's really difficult for me to separate my art background and experience with my hospitality background at this point. I mean, I long before I was involved in cocktails, I was a pub bartender. That's really how I made ends meet through school when I was an undergraduate. And I took, a healthy few years off before I went back to school for graphic design, and I was bartending the whole time. And when I left my undergraduate tenure with a liberal arts degree, I'm not sure I necessarily felt like I had a lot of specific skills that were gonna really come in handy in the world. And it's really only come back to me since then, now in my career, that I recognize the most important thing that I got from sort of that foundational education was the ability to look at art and assess it and ask the right questions. And realistically, we're talking about these beautiful artisanal spirits. We're talking about cocktails. This is art. This is applied art, and after I finished graphic design school and really thought for a hot second I was going to get out of hospitality, I started at Pouring Ribbons. It was really just to sort of be able to pay the bills while I was paying back student loans, and lucked into this position that was cocktail forward. I had never done cocktails before and had the amazing opportunity to learn from Joaquin Simo and Toby Maloney and Troy Seidel. They were my mentors. Not for nothing, Stephen, one of the first drinks I ever had, it was on the opening menu for Pouring Ribbons, and they would have you taste each component of the drink before they, would make the drink and have you taste the cocktail. The first time I ever had sherry was for a drink called Lust for Life that had Lustau's Palo Cortado in it. And it was also a mezcal-based drink, and it was the first time I'd ever had mezcal with Del Maguey Vida. So in this like span of 10 minutes, I tasted sherry for the first time, mezcal for the first time, and one of still my favorite drinks from the Pouring Ribbons canon, and it changed my life. Like there was never any going back. I really started to recognize how creative the industry is, and as that position grew, I was fascinated to see how many people do come from arts backgrounds. I think whether or not they're in hospitality to pay the bills while they're trying to develop other skills, or whether they're doing it concurrently with those skills, it attracts people from this creative standpoint because it is this art of making, and it is this, more imaginative discussion about what you have in glass, especially in the renaissance of cocktailing that and post-renaissance now that we've experienced in the United States. So all of that's always been like closely tied together. And now in my job, graphic design still comes in extremely handy, as it did at Pouring Ribbons, because I helped. They were doing really quick menu flips. In the beginning, we were doing a menu flip a quarter. So every 3 months, you were changing out items on the menu. A lot of that type of work is done in-house, especially if you're a small bar with a limited budget. You may have paid for a design firm to do your initial branding, which they did. This amazing company called Warren Red designed the logo, the branding, the interior design, the whole thing, but then really passed off those files to management to be able to handle all of those quick turnarounds in the menu. And I was just fresh out of school, and I was like, I can do that. I'm going to be paying for this skill for the rest of my life. Do you need any help? And it just sort of took off from there, because we're talking about holistic business here. It's never just making a cocktail. There's all this collateral that goes with it. And so you need people with these varying skills to think about how to put it all together. Mm-hmm. And it felt like a very seamless combination. And the ability to then make drinks and serve drinks and put information about those drinks on a menu and see how people interpreted that information in real time during shifts completely changed my understanding of practical design and how I was making drinks. And that sort of happened simultaneously. So I think from there, it's just never been separate. Even now, even in the last couple of years, as I'm focusing more perhaps on the copywriting side of things and even more on the language, which really started with thinking about menu descriptions and how you entice people and sort of educate them at the same time about what they're drinking in this way that isn't, overwhelming to them. The visual side of things still is incredibly important because people are looking at visual and written language, and they're using materials beyond just talking to someone about these spirits. And the way that you can apply that is it's endless. So for me, spirits are art, and art has informed how I talk about spirits. That's
I love that. I think that's really beautiful. And I'm glad to hear that, you're still getting to use that part of yourself and moving forward, because all that schooling, you wouldn't want it to go to waste. Now, Steve, I know it's not as easy for you to put the music into what you do, but I'm assuming it still influences you as a person.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I graduated grad school in 2008. Wonderful timing. I lucked out. I got a desk job.
No financial crisis happening at that time.
Yeah. Great time to, enter the job market. Lots of faith in the economy during those days. But yeah, I had a desk job right out of grad school. I hated it. I did it for a year and a half. I was gigging and teaching a lot. I was in Chicago at the time. And ultimately I decided, I'm going to go bartend. I can make more money. I'll have more flexibility to teach and, gig. And, after a year or two of bartending, and I really started to get into, creating cocktails, I realized I'm kind of good at this, but more importantly, I really enjoy this. I love the creative aspect, especially, if you actually have the chance to, talk to a guest and play the game. Well, let me make you something on the spot, off the menu, tailored to what you like to drink. Those were my, most favorite moments while I was still behind the bar. And I felt like it nurtured my, creative side, which I definitely wasn't getting sitting behind the desk booking doctor's appointments. So that's kind of what, got me more enthusiastic about being in the hospitality industry. And then as time went on, I started doing cocktail competitions, and I started to do, well with that. And that kind of opened up the door for, bigger roles within the hospitality industry. And then I started to meet brand people. People wanting you to buy their products as, a buyer. You start to meet these people, and you start to hang out with them, and you start to, see what they do on a regular basis. And I remember at one point I was like, I think I would be a good brand ambassador. I don't feel like I would be as good of a sales rep in that I'm extremely picky. It would be hard for me to sell something that I, don't wholeheartedly love and support. But I found like my interest in working with specific brands tailored to one category, whether, I started off in whiskey, I've been with sherry now forever. I like the idea of, representing a category and really, driving home education. I taught music for so many years. I feel like that's really where, the bridge between both worlds come is through education. I love to teach. I love to, see people light up and become engaged in, whatever topic I'm, speaking about. So I feel like the creative aspect, and then also, a job in education outside of music is what really, led me towards the brand ambassador route.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, teaching is a skill, and when you love to do it, to see people light up. I do have a question for you. What is your instrument of choice?
Saxophone is what I started off on, and I still play. I also have a degree in music theory and orchestral conducting. I can play a little bit of piano and clarinet. I wish I played piano better, but it's a beast.
I wish I played anything at all. It's an incredible talent, and saxophone. Wow. You and Charlotte Bosi should no, is she saxophone or maybe she's trombone? She every once in a while, Charlotte Bosi from Hendrix gets out her I think actually I think it is a saxophone. She gets out and plays at some of her events. It's always a treat. Okay, well, we talked about it a little, so I guess we did cover like why you transition. Like, I guess Amanda, sorry, I'm not talking very clearly. Steve, you talked about how you jumped into the brand ambassador side of things, but Amanda, what made you want to go to the supply side?
I'm not entirely sure it was extremely thought out at the time, but
was there a pandemic involved in this?
There wasn't. I started at Skurnik a few years before the pandemic kicked in, but I'm not a young bartender by any means. By the time I kicked into cocktailing, I was already in my 30s. And I was part of that opening staff at Pouring Ribbons, and I learned so much there. And I was working at the same time at Mayahuel, in the East Village as well, and it learned so much there. But I think it's quite natural at a certain point to feel like you're starting to hit a ceiling of growth within any one particular job. And my knees were starting to hurt an awful lot. So I really just sort of wanted to break out and start seeing if I could do what I felt that I could do in other scenarios. And I wanted to learn more. Adam, my boss, was a regular at Pouring Ribbons. That's how I met him. He was a regular at Mayahuel as well at the time he was living in the East Village. So we had become friends over the years. And he was still sort of developing his team. My job didn't exist at the time. And he really loved the idea of creating something that would allow me and the skills that he knew I had, the specific skills, especially with graphic design, to grow over time. So I came in for an interview, not really thinking that it was something I was going to pursue, but meeting the team and meeting Michael and Harmon and seeing the potential to still grow creatively, but maybe have a salary and health insurance.
that lovely salary thing. Yeah,
it was too compelling to say no to. So I continued to bartend for a while after, just on the weekends, until that I just got too old to do both of those things at the same time, and transitioned just to doing this job right before the pandemic hit, actually.
Good timing.
Yes. Yeah.
Very, very good timing. And there's something to be said about healthcare and salary. Some of you just went from being an entrepreneur to having a full-time job again. I'm like, oh yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
That it is really, really nice. Well, let's get back into the education side, because both of you are in education, the education side of the business, right? So, and it's definitely something I've worked with for many, many years, and it is always a challenge. Like, how do you create something that is engaging, right? So, taking that boring content sometimes you get from a brand and then making it in something engaging. And then, and I'm reading this off so I get all the question that I wrote for myself correctly, because I had a couple of things I want to say, and making it so it resonates with the trade and also the consumer and the distributor, who are three very different audiences, right? So, and I know we need to cater the message, but is there anything you have learned? And we talked a little bit about it with the dumplings, some key best practices of what can make something more engaging so that the person actually wants to hear the rest of what you're saying. I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
Well, I think it's knowing your audience is a big part of it. One sort of educational event isn't going to work for everyone. So I think that's a big part of it. The dumpling worked out well because our distributor in Minnesota is very much in the same vein as Skurnik, really trying to put out great product. And so they have wonderful reps that are very knowledgeable and passionate. And so to be able to come in and offer a course that's, focused on the nicer sherries that we offer, I know for them, they appreciated it because they were already very familiar with our, entry level Solera Familiar lineup. So I think that was, part of it is, recognizing that, they're a cut above and, offering something that, would continue to make them, interested in the category. And then as far as the dumpling portion of that, it was really, like I alluded to earlier, just taking, a standard thing that we all do, but kind of tailoring it to make it a bit, different. I think the one of the biggest things with sherry is, you have so many different flavor profiles. Being able to show how those flavors can work in the real world, whether that's cocktail creation. We do a cocktail class where, like, Amanda, you try all the stuff and then you see how it works within the drink. or in the case of, the pairing dinner, offering something that's not so, buttoned up and it's a huge commitment. You can come in and out and leave at your leisure. So I think, to be successful in something like this, knowing your audience is, crucial. And then also on the flip side of that, being aware of what's going on out there. I think we're very fortunate that, within the industry, we're all very, close knit with one another. It is a really tight industry where we all, come together and support one another. I used to work in the medical field a long time ago, and I definitely didn't feel that sort of camaraderie amongst the industry. So, showing up to other people's events and seeing what they're doing and how can I take that great concept and tailor it towards our brand and make it, unique, but, emulating the success that they had off of it. So I think it's a two-pronged approach, being active and in the industry and seeing what everyone's doing, but also, knowing your audience and, trying to, create something specific and, impressionable to them.
No, I think that those are a great point. Knowing your audience obviously is a great point, and definitely I love seeing what other people do. You do have to go out there because there is so many creative minds within our industry. So being able to see what ideas they've come up with and be like, that could work for us, and how do we cater it? And I know a lot of the stuff you did, you mentioned before about one of your coworkers, he does a lot of online stuff. So have you found that is it successful to give people, and I'm asking, also because something I'm creating, to give them preliminary online work, to give them like a baseline, like, before you do something engaging. Have you ever done things like that?
Yeah, so strangely enough, over the past couple of weeks, I've been sitting in for Lucas, teaching the online course. He's got COVID and he's just been too under the weather to do it. So over the last 2 weeks, it's been the first time I've been able to teach the course online. And I will say that I feel like, especially given that it's a certification course and they're going to have a test later on in the week, I feel like it is more impactful to split it up that way. Because, when I took the master course in Jerez, it was, 2-3 days of all intensive. You're in a classroom, you're visiting all the bodegas, and then at the end you have to do this, elaborate blind tasting and take a written test. I feel like having, all of the, history and, production, focused on, the beginning of the week, having some time in between, the first class and the test to, ask questions and, reach out to us as, instructors for, us to be able to explain things, and then having the test later on the week, I felt it is much more impactful. Giving them the time to, digest all the information, we just gave them. It's a 100-page manual. It's a lot of information as far as sherry production goes. So having that extra time for them to really, take in everything you gave them, I think is instrumental.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Amanda, for you, I mean, you have to write a lot of content, and so how do you guys combine it to make sure that they actually absorb it?
Yeah, it's I'm with the writing. It's an interesting scenario where I really think of us as sort of a reference material. Like to a certain extent, our writing is sort of a loose dictionary of the stuff that we are offering. Because of course we have these amazing sales reps and the specialists that are going to speak in their own voice to their accounts and the relationships that they've developed. And they're the boots on the ground that sort of understand how to tailor that conversation to the person that they're talking to. What I want to make sure is that they don't have to worry about bogging themselves down in the fine point details for a portfolio that's, getting close on 300 different brands at this point. There's no way for them to do that anyway. So I want to make sure that our information is stylistically incredibly consistent, that we're being really careful about our terminology and our language, and that we're being consistent with that as well. That you can find the same types of information in the same places, regardless of brand. And that if you do have an account that's asking that particular question, they really want to know, what char level those barrels were at, or maybe the full list of botanicals for a gin. I want them to know with a decent level of confidence that they can look on the Skurnik website or in our internal information, and they're going to be able to find that information quickly because we have it ready for them. Like, man behind the desk, we want to make sure you have the map that you need to get out of town, like, that sort of thing. But then beyond that, we of course have people that are not working for Skurnik using this information as well, especially if it's up on the Skurnik website. And I think that's a tremendous responsibility, because you have accounts, especially on the retail side, looking at that information to help them learn about the spirits, and then potentially using that same copy on their own websites if they decide to buy the spirit and sell it. So again, that consistency of information is incredibly important. But then after we do sort of a list of bullet points of what we deem sort of the core basic information, because of course we're not writing dissertations about all this stuff. Like, sometimes I'm tempted, but there's no time for that. Core bullet information, we finish with what we call the elevator pitch, which is just sort of this separate paragraph that sort of zooms out for a second and adds added context, or is maybe more in a conversational voice for the company that says, this is why we're excited about this thing. This is why we think it's really cool. This is why it's special. Because I think especially looking at wine materials over the years, and as I said, not having a great wine background, it was one thing to see that technical information, but it didn't paint a picture for me about why I would want to drink this thing. And so we still have to have that piece of information in the copy as well. So we're really trying to fit a spectrum where, the nerdiest of the nerdy is going to find basic information and know that we take that seriously, that we're not just bringing on spirits and running off and only worrying about the sales, that we care about how these things are made, but that we're also giving context for sort of a broader spectrum of consumer about why this thing is exciting. We're talking about a lot of small producers, a lot of esoteric spirits, so you have to give it context.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find a distributor, now for you guys, I've always been a big believer, like when you do a distributor training, granted, there are some, like within every distributor and every sales force, they're definitely the nerds who, not the nerds, the ones who really care. They're all in. They want to know everything about the yeast and the aging and all that stuff. And they want the full picture. But for the most part, what do you find that is like what top line information do most sales reps want to know?
Sometimes it depends on the category. I'm really delighted at this point, and I think this goes kind of for the industry at large, for hospitality professionals that are sort of in the on-prem world as well, or in retail. We're cycling back into almost like the starting point again, where it's time to start talking about foundational education. I think there's definitely this prevalence to want to pretend like you know more than you know, or to be afraid to ask questions because you don't want to seem like you don't know things. But we're talking about so many categories of spirits, so much detail, and unless you're one person focusing on making this one thing and that's your whole life's work, chances are you're not going to know everything about it, and it's okay to ask questions. But sometimes zooming out, and for what I find with the sales team these days, for instance, our monthly sales meetings, we only get about 25, 30 minutes to talk to every group of reps about whatever the topic is for that day. You do kind of have to distill it down to a certain extent and really think about what you want the takeaways to be. You want to be able to offer them deeper information, but say, okay, what's the big impression we're trying to make here? And the types of questions that they're asking still relate to that. So this last sales meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, we just zoomed back and started talking about the category of American rye. We talked about sweet mash versus sour mash fermentation, and what bottled and bond means, and what it means to be an independent bottler versus a distiller, because refining those pitches is always really important. And those aren't the types of technicalities you want to get caught up on when you're out in the field at an account trying to sell a spirit. It's not like you want to get tripped up on something because you're nervous about talking about it. So regularizing this sort of like basic information, I always find a really interesting practice for me. Like, I'm still learning as well, and for our spirits team who only think about spirits. But it's always really useful for the reps as well, because they're thinking about so many things at once. But nothing warms my heart more than to see them ask a technical question that I think 3-4 years ago they wouldn't have asked. What base distillates are distilled from in gin is a thing I think 5 years ago we weren't talking about at all. But now people want to know, is it wheat? Is it corn? Is it coming from the country of origin? People are more interested in sort of the agricultural aspect of the spirits and the sustainability of how they're being made in general. And if you have the information, that like chances are they're going to ask it. So that's really exciting for me.
That's good. That is exciting to hear. I was going to say, Stephen, anything on your side? Like, is there anything you've noticed now? I've gone, and we're going to go into how it's affecting the industry, but for yourself, with the sales reps, anything changed since COVID?
Oh, well, I feel like there's been a lot of turnover, both on the distributor side and also in hospitality. So I do feel like it's kind of been like the great reset. It's like, well, we gotta start from square one and make sure everyone, is well trained, because we lost a lot of people, for one reason or another. So I feel like that's been the biggest challenge, especially on the hospitality side. I don't know how other brand ambassadors feel. I feel like getting a staff training these days is way harder than it was pre-COVID. And I know that kind of ties into, shortages on staff, people being overworked. It's become, problematic to set those up. But I do feel like
it's actually getting harder. I was actually thinking I get that the short supply, but aren't people... I had a thought that maybe people were desperate for knowledge because they're all starting from scratch.
No, absolutely. So I feel like the spots that are, well staffed and they've kind of got that under control. I feel like those are the people that are, have been reaching out to me, like larger hospitality groups, but still the smaller, bars and restaurants. It's been harder for me to, solidify a date for me to come in, even just for like 20 or 30 minutes and just do a basic dive into sherry. It's been much harder than working with larger groups like, the Jose Andres. He's a big supporter of ours. We work with every Jaleo across the U.S. It's very easy, to pitch them an intimate sherry dinner, or let's come in and I'll do a staff training for, your 3 restaurants here in Chicago. But for the smaller, spots that don't have a lot of money behind them, the owner might be also, the head bartender. It's been much more challenging. So I feel like the want is there, but sometimes the ability to execute is not. And so I'm hoping that, over these next, year or two, things in that nature are going to start to settle out more, and we can start to resume everything as we did, pre-COVID.
Fascinating. Do you see that too, Amanda? I mean, I know you're not in the street, but do you hear that?
Yeah, for sure. We actually last summer, Adam and I did a training at the Culinary Institute of America. They have spirits, or knowing about spirits is part of the curriculum now, which is super cool. But we didn't really know a lot about the class going into it, and it was a pretty wide spectrum of people and level of knowledge. And we were just doing a sort of essential blind tasting and a little bit of cocktail 101. So we're walking around the room and having them taste and be like, so what are you experiencing on the palate? Like, does the spirit taste, like it's lower in alcohol? Does it taste hot? And like one of the students in the class raised their hand and they're like, what do you mean when you say hot? And I got so excited because I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm not in, the Flatiron district anymore. Like, let's get to this. Like, let's remember just sort of the general level of curiosity and education that is really probably more prevalent across the country. And let's step it back and really think about how we're talking about spirits and how we want to teach people. The reset is a chance to really build an appreciation and a better vernacular, I think, for how we talk about spirits, that even if we don't see it right this second, is only going to be reflected over the years in the consumers and how they're appreciating spirits and the level of quality that they're going to insist upon, which I think is super cool. We're sort of ground floor with that right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it is ground floor. And to you, Stephen, you brought that in mind. Like, it might be harder because some people just don't have the time. But at the same time, it is an amazing opportunity for us to kind of come in again and establish that. I feel like it's 2005. 2006, where we're kind of coming in and the staff are all as wide-eyed and ready, excited about, what you're going to teach them. And because the consumer, because of COVID, who educated themselves for 2 years about how to make cocktails at home, about spirits, they went on all these classes, they're more well-educated, so they want to know more. They want the staff they have a level of expectation for the staff. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time, but also a hard time because a lot of the places aren't able to accept the help because they just don't have the time or the staff. So we're coming upon the hour. We got one last question. And basically it's more about like, how do you stay up to date? Both of you are in positions where you need to know what's going on, right? So you need to stay up on latest trends, what's happening in the hospitality industry, so you can kind of incorporate them into your educational programs. How do you incorporate them into your day-to-day roles? So love to hear your thoughts on that. Amanda?
Yeah, I think listening is really key. The spirit specialists at Skurnik, just hearing what challenges and what interests they're getting out in their accounts and in the streets is always really fascinating to me. Part of why the sales meetings mean so much to me is because it gives me an opportunity to step away from my computer and actually listen to the questions that the sales team is asking, and seeing how they're interpreting the copy that we've put, to sort of like identify where there's gaps in the information, or maybe we're not answering the questions that they're getting from their accounts, and being able to tweak and refine that. I have one person on my team now who started about a year ago, Brian Tosh, who was also a bartender at Pouring Ribbons after I left, and he's amazing. He has come into the distribution side more recently than me, so I feel like he's sort of got a fresher perspective and a closer perspective to what it was to actually be behind the stick during the pandemic as well. So I think even just like looking at what he's interested in, and sort of like the books that he's excited about, the articles that he like have piqued his interest, is really telling to me about a certain generation of person in the hospitality industry right now. But I think really it's just about like keeping yourself open to the questions that are being asked around you, whether that's like going and sitting and have a drink and just seeing like what people are talking about at the bar, or the types of things that are coming into my inbox because the rep needs an answer to a question that they couldn't get in the copy. All of that really sort of like starts to paint a picture really quickly about what people are interested in any given point in time.
No, it makes sense. And how about you, Stephen?
Well, just given the nature of the role, I'm always out there in the field. So, attending, larger industry events. It was the first time I had been out to Seattle Cocktail Week back in April, which was lovely. And, kind of digesting, each market or each region in the U.S., I kind of feel like has its own feel, has its own way of drinking. This really hit me when I moved from South Carolina to New York. I realized, well, man, everyone drinks way different in New York than they do in the South. So getting out there,
or just drink different.
I would say they probably drink the same amount, but they definitely drink different. For instance, I remember before moving to New York, I was running a bar back home. They were trying to, have a cocktail bar that you would find in a bigger city. And I remember it was like a Hendrick's gin martini with like muddled white grapes and Saint Germain, really lovely drink using great ingredients, $10. Outrage in South Carolina for $10, martini featuring Hendrick's. Outrage, so expensive. And so I feel like that was the biggest thing that, stuck out to me, is the South just wasn't, or at least at the time, wasn't quite ready for that, wasn't, ready to, take the leap into, the cocktail world, both, as a drink, but also, financially. It's I feel, especially nowadays, it's becoming harder and harder to justify spending $18 or $20 on a drink if you're, strapped for cash. But that was one of the things I saw the most. It was, I guess, more simple drinking back home versus more elevated, more curious drinkers in, the bigger metropolitan markets. But like Amanda said, it's a lot of, listening, spending, the quality time at accounts, really building those relationships with people to where I don't feel like I'm selling you anything, or I'm just here to, pitch. I am actually engaged in you as a human. I'm coming to see you, so, being involved, taking the time to listen to people, see what others are doing, spending time at these industry events, I really feel is the way to go.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, it's a great way to stay up to date, and traveling the country, you have such an interesting perspective to see how different markets operate and, the different trends that are happening within them. It really does give you a different perspective, which is going to be quite useful actually in your career overall. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up with one last question, which is if you had any advice for anybody who was going from the bar side into the supplier side, what would it be? Amanda?
I think, look for spirits that you do enjoy. I mean, Stephen mentioned this before. It's like, don't tie yourself to something where you're just, giving a sales line, but it's not something you would want to drink yourself. Authenticity and sincerity is going to go a long way towards making you successful in that thing. If you're lucky enough to find something like that, which there are so many amazing brands, it should be possible at this point. Know your worth and talk to other people about what they're making in this industry. Don't let anyone lowball you and think that that's all that you should be given just because you are transitioning from bartending into this side of the industry. I think like knowledge is power when it comes to this sort of thing, and I don't think we talk enough, especially if you're doing sort of independent supplier side type of work, contracting of any kind. I don't think we're comparing notes enough to make sure that people are getting paid what they're worth. So definitely talk to people that you know in the industry. I think those are the big things. And then you actually mentioned Charlotte a little while ago. When I did Bar 5 Day 20 million years ago, she spoke. She was one of the guest presenters. And I remember her talking about developing her job as a brand ambassador and how we were really at this like frontier of the industry where just because a job hadn't existed before didn't mean that it wasn't needed and couldn't exist. And for me, that was something that really always stayed with me and resonated. So when you're looking at the industry, don't assume that there are only, one or two avenues to go. Look for companies that are going to help you develop and grow as the needs of the industry grows as well, because I don't think we've stopped, really articulating how people can be professionals.
And I think that's great advice. And also, maybe it's also looking at your entire life experience and maybe creating a job and pitching them something that they didn't even know they needed. But you do have to prove it. It's a harder way to go, but if you prove it, it's amazing. I became the head mixologist of the largest drinks company when they didn't know what mixologist was. I had to tell them I wanted to be their mixologist, and they said, "What is that?" And I said, and I had to prove to them that the position and a national brand ambassador position was needed, and it never existed before. So it is definitely possible. Stephen?
I would say if you're curious about, this side of the work, really leverage your network. I just mentioned, I'm always trying to build relationships. I'm trying to actively be involved in, bar managers' lives, bartenders' lives. If you're one of those people, don't hesitate to, ask the brand ambassador who comes in all the time, do you know of any opportunities? Do you know anyone who's looking? I feel like the camaraderie in our industry is so strong. Most of us are really, willing and wanting to help you in any way possible. So, me personally, if, you ask me, I'm getting old, my back hurts, my knees hurt, I can't bartend anymore. I want to transition into, and have any leads, I'm going to go out of my way for you. If you're, someone that I believe would do a good job. So, utilize those relationships. I would say, become organized. The bartender way of life is much different than the 9 to 5 where, you are responsible for answering calls and doing emails. So I feel like, a lot of it is your own due diligence on that regard. And I feel like the people who are, the most successful tend to be the most organized as well. So I feel like that's a big part of, what we do is just staying on top of everything. And then, also you need to have a bit of, patience, but also flexibility. Things go awry and on this side of the industry a lot, whether the shipment didn't come in and you're doing a dinner that evening and they have no product and everyone's freaking out. You need to be the person that's chill and you need to come up with solutions. So, being able to, tamper down on, the pressure that sometimes arises at the last minute, being able to overcome that, be able to be a problem solver, I think is also very key. this thing's going to go on tonight, regardless of, whether the product arrived or not. So what can we do to execute it as best as we can given the circumstances? So I always feel like it's a mathematical equation. You have some variables one time and then, a different set of variables the next time. And ultimately, we're always trying to, give the same sort of experience, which is, the best experience possible. But the way you get there always, can change, given on the circumstances. So yeah, utilize your network, put those relationships to work, be organized, and then, try to tamper down on the stress and, become a problem solver.
No, I love all that because it is. And at the end of the day, everybody loves to say we're not curing cancer. It's just alcohol, and most people wouldn't even notice the things that have changed because they don't know how it was supposed to go. Only you know how it was supposed to go. But also, if you want to get on the supplier side, also not to promote my own thing, but watch a few of these because then you really understand what goes into this job. Because it's not always as easy. It's not for everybody. It's definitely not the right position for everybody. But it can be if you have the passion and enthusiasm and a lot of things that Stephen talked about, being organized, being disciplined, being out there in the world, and definitely use your network and talk to people, as you said, Amanda, finding out what you should be getting paid and understanding that. I think that's really important. Making sure you're getting paid your worth is extremely important in this industry. So definitely there's a lot of people you can talk to. And as you said, Stephen, a lot of people are willing to share their information so freely. I always say in this industry, if you're willing to learn, there is somebody willing to teach you for absolutely nothing. And that's what's magic about it. That's one of the things I love about it. Well, that being said, thank you so much for you two coming on, Amanda and Stephen. It's really been a true pleasure. I hope we have an opportunity to have a drink in person, maybe at Tails.
I'll be down there.
Exactly. I'll definitely be there way too long for 7 whole days because I have to be. So lots of events happening. And until then, have a great summer, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. Thank you so much for your comments. This will live on Facebook for the next 2 weeks, and it's always available on the YouTube channel, Celebrate the Brand Ambassador. And eventually it'll be a podcast. Right now it's just a live show. Eventually it gets converted into a podcast. But anyway, thank you so much, you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You as well.
Okay. Bye.